How's it going, everybody? Today, we're looking at the top 10 cards from the Brothers War for Pioneer. Like most sets, we want to go through the best cards so that you can get an advantage going into the early weeks of Pioneer. However, unlike most sets, the Brothers War will be legal on release weekend for the upcoming regional championships at DreamHack Atlanta, which I will be playing in. So let's dive right in and take a look at what cards from the Brothers War are set to shake up Pioneer. Starting at number 10, we have Brotherhood's End. This is a nice upgrade for any deck that would otherwise be playing Anger of the Gods in situations where you don't need to exile the creatures you're destroying. Being able to deal 3 to each creature and each planeswalker is a great mode to being able to sweep up small creatures as well as knock out some planeswalkers. This will be nice against mono green as well as various small decks like mono white humans, and having the modal ability to destroy all artifacts 3 or less is especially good in a format where we're seeing the potential for Power Stone tokens. This is a card that has a lot of upside as well as potential depending on how aggressive decks tend to shake out moving forward. But right now, 3 damage is in a good spot, and being able to hit planeswalkers is really advantageous. Next up at number 9, we have Titania, Voice of Gaia. This is a card that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, and I think it is a card that on raw stats as well as just words put on the card is definitely worth a second glance. As a 3-mana 3/4 with reach, it already does a lot of good work at stopping opposing aggro decks as well as shoring up some of the issues that most green decks have with spirits and various flyer decks, as well as Arclight Phoenix specifically. But the additional text of whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you gain 2 life means that your Cavalier of Thorns for mono green or various mill cards such as from Greasefang will help net you survive some of the early turns. Again, I think this is a card that has the opportunity to at least be able to shore up some of the aggro matchups that have otherwise plagued some decks like mono green Devotion. And if we see something like a Karn ban or a Nykthos ban in the future, I think it is just a good value card with good sizing that would do well in any green aggro deck. Next up at number 8, we have the Stasis Coffin. This is our first of the many sideboard cards from this set that will bolster Karn the Great Creator. Being able to have a legendary artifact that sits around that you can pop at any time for 2 mana and tapping it to gain protection from everything until your next turn means that people can't target you with discard, people can't attack you to death. It'll stop or fog things like Brave the Elements, and does a lot of good work at stopping burn spells or other ways for people to finish off the game. While I think it's definitely a very situational card, the benefit of having Karn the Great Creator is that you can fill your sideboard with situational cards that are potentially good. And right now, I think this is a card that I'm interested in testing out. We're not sure if it will end up in the sideboard by the time we're at Atlanta, but for now, it is definitely worth a slot of consideration. Next up at number 7, we have Portal to Phyrexia. This 9 mana artifact is at first glance probably too expensive for something like mono green Karn, but there are times where you may want to consider it. Being able to wrath your opponent's board by having them sacrifice 3 creatures is definitely worthwhile, and being able to recur cards from your graveyard onto the battlefield in your upkeep means you can continually have more Cavalier triggers and other creature value cards. Where I suspect this will see the most play though is in refurbished decks or Indomitable Creativity, as you're able to play it in a deck with no real creatures as a means to wrath your opponent's board and then bring back cards from a graveyard, so you can use your opponent's graveyard as a means to fuel it. You can use it as a sideboard option in matchups where you don't think the Xenaghost and Worldspine Worm combo will be enough, or it opens up the opportunity to play some other threats to pair with the portal. Overall, the power level is there. 9 mana is a lot, but if you're able to cheat into play for 4 or 5 mana, that is obviously well above rate. Next up, we have Phyrexian Flesh Gorger. This 7 mana 7/5 with Menace, Lifelink, and Ward, pay life equal to its power is a big old Wormcoil Engine impersonator, which I think could see sideboard play in mono green Karn or other Karn the Great Creator decks as a way to stop aggro, especially because paying 7 life to target it is usually too much for most decks to handle. The big thing about this is in any aggro black deck or red-black mid-range style deck, even a mono black aggro deck, a 1 black 3/3 Menace Lifelinker that has Ward 3 life is definitely above rate, and being able to have something to protect you from flooding out by just making a massive threat in the late game is really powerful. We've seen with adventure cards how good modal creatures are. Prototype gives you that ability. Next up at number 5, we have the Stone Brain. This is the hot tech deck for Karn the Great Creator sideboards, especially mono green. This is a card that is able to cranial extract cards from your opponent's deck, and you can take up to 4 of them. That does include basic lands. However, you can only take up 4 of them, and your opponent draws a card for each exile card that was in their hand. Being able to do this means that you can loop it with Karn the Great Creator because it exiles itself, giving you another way to mill out essentially by removing all the cards in your opponent's deck. It also means that you can hit specific cards that are generally problematic. Think of the times that you are set up with a good board state at a reasonable life total against mono white, and then they brave the elements and kill you. Without brave the elements, they may never be able to get through. Same thing with blue-red Arclight Phoenix. If you hit their Phoenixes, if you hit their temporal trespasses, their treasure cruises, at a point it becomes very difficult for them to ever actually beat you. Next up, we have a little bit of a cheat. It is our regularly scheduled 2-for-1 here at number 4, and that is going to be Brushland and Underground River. Obviously, we saw the impact that Karplusian Forest has had in reinvigorating Gruul in the format. Underground River is likely to give a small boost to the blue-black decks, though mainly I think it might help expand the ability of players to play Esper reasonably. The big one to me is Brushland. We have always said that green-white was held back by a lack of mana in the same way that green-red was. Not being able to play enough green sources to run your elves while also maintaining your white sources is a real problem. So for me, Brushland is a big get and likely to see green-white based decks pop up in popularity in the same way that Gruul saw a big uptick from Karplusian Forest. Next up, we're into our top 3, and that's going to start with Gix, Yogmoth, Praetor. Obviously, we've seen the effect of Shieldred the Apocalypse in the last few months. These Praetor cards are somewhat hit or miss, but this one to me looks like a hit. A 3-mana 3/3 is a reasonable rate, but being able to have a ability to draw cards whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to one of your opponents, being able to pay a life to draw a card means that you are going to consistently be able to generate card advantage. To me, this could fit in a mono black aggro deck, red black sacrifice, red black midrange, mono black devotion, any deck that is looking to get recursive advantage and put pressure on your opponent is interested in at least considering this. And as you move to the later game, especially if you have Nykthos in mono black devotion, the 7-mana ability to discard X and exile the top X cards of your opponent's library, playing them without having to pay their mana cost. So you should be able to turn excess cards in your hand that you've generated from the first ability into a villainous wealth that should end the game. While this isn't going to suture any of the big bad matchups that these kind of decks have, anytime you get a high power level card, it is worth considering in various slots. Next up, we have the penultimate card here, number 2. This is a Woodcaller Automaton. This is a 10 mana, that's right, 10 mana 8/8 that does something quite unique. One of the big issues with mono green Karn is that you are always looking for new effects to get with your Karn minus. One of the effects that we didn't have was a untapper. We had to rely on either Teferi, who slows the sunset, or Kiora Behemoth Beckoner, and while that is generally enough, being able to add in an artifact that can untap target land is massive upside in that you can turn your Nykthoses into additional Nykthos activations. Now, for 10 mana, that might not seem worth it, but what if I could interest you for 4 mana, 2 of which is green pips for that Nykthos? At 2 green as a 3/3 that untaps target land, in this case a Nykthos, you're able to generate a huge advent in mana for cheap, as well as getting 2 extra pips, so it's already half discounted on the next Nykthos activation. To me, it's not necessary to have this card as a sideboard option. We've seen green already be quite powerful. It is always important to note when you get unique and powerful effects that you would like. This is a great addition to green and will most likely mean that your Chainveil combos are easier to execute and you'll need less overall mana or devotion to get it started. Last up, number 1, our top card from the Brothers War for Pioneer is, no shocker, another artifact that will hopefully, if not definitely, see play in mono green Karn, and that is Cityscape Leveler. Every mono green iteration has been playing Meteor Golem as a means to kill your hard things to answer, anything from planeswalkers to enchantments to Kalidases and other problematic permanents, including opponents' Karn, the Great Creators. Well, now instead of a 3/3 for 7 mana, you have an 8/8 Trampler for 8 mana. Now, the 1 extra mana adding 5 extra power and toughness and trample is a big deal. You want to see a pivot to aggro be possible out of these sideboard decks depending on how the game is shaping up. This is a great tool to be able to power through any stoppage, as well as being able to block things like Brave the Elements while destroying an opponent's opponent's creature. Whenever you cast this spell, so it doesn't have to resolve, which is important as well, as opposed to Meteor Golem, and whenever it attacks, you can destroy a non-land permanent and its opponent gets a tap Power Stone token, which Karn turns off inherently. Now, one of the things we look at when we look at these artifact-based cards for Karn is, do they self-exile? Because that means you can loop them with Karn, and because of Unearth, you can pay an additional 8 mana to have this come back into play, attack, get rid of another problematic permanent, and then it will exile, meaning you can pick it back up with Karn. One of the things that you may have noticed from these top 10 cards is that there is a lot of benefit to Karn the Great Creator, as people suspected when we saw that it was going to be an artifact focused set. Obviously, there are some really powerful cards. Even going beyond 10, there are some more artifacts that could make the list for Karn the Great Creator sideboards, so be sure to take a deep dive into the rest of the cards if you are planning to play mono green in your regional qualifier. There are tons and tons of goodies in this set. This is a very high power level set, and I would not be shocked to see more and more cards even beyond this list starting to see play in Pioneer. But with that, we have our top 10. Hope this helps in your adventures on your upcoming regional championship. Until next time.